So we're,
Is it posted yet? Right, John?
No, just start in order to go live, just a second.
and it sometimes takes several minutes for it to find its way through the system, but while that's happening, why don't we go ahead and get started?
Good morning. My name is Cheryl Achilles. I'm the Vermont Ag and Environmental Laboratory Director in Randolph Center. And I understand from what I'm reading of this bill, it's regarding labeling and testing around baby food products for toxic heavy metals. So 4 contaminants of concern, from what I understand, nothing more, right? Okay. So the Agency of Agriculture, this wouldn't be under their purview necessarily. But I have talked with staff to kind of figure out what it would take to roll it out in case this tends to land on us. I'm not sure. So more research needed. But I was telling Chair Durfee earlier that my original role with the state was to get the Vermont Department of Health Food Laboratory ISO accredited. So ISO 17025. So the American Association of Public Health A2LA, American Association of Laboratories, came to testify the other day and mentioned VDHL specifically and their capabilities. But what he didn't mention was they don't have chemistry under their certification. It's only the microbiology food laboratory at this point. And that was the scope that I worked under years ago as well. So just know that to get ISO accredited, it takes 2 to 3 years, maybe 4, depending on what you're trying to do. And it's pretty costly. It's costly to maintain. When I was there, it cost about $5,500 per year just to maintain that certification. A2LA was our certification body, and they came every year. So it was every other year was an on-site audit, and the in between years was a desk audit, quality desk audit for that. So no matter what, $5,500 a year, just to level set that.
We wouldn't, there's nothing in this bill that would be requiring anybody to start a lab or to contribute.
Okay, maybe I misunderstood because I saw that manufacturers were required to test monthly, I think, for lead, mercury, cadmium, and arsenic. I did check the FDA website. So in the bill, it mentions to 6 micrograms per kilogram level. And I don't know what the health department's stance on that is. I'm sure they want to go as low, close to 0 as you can. But there's some instrument. Usually the limits set go beyond what an instrument can detect. So I wanted to make that clear. Even the most precise instruments right now it cannot get to 0. So if you're worried or thinking about that, that's something to consider. Yeah, so ppb and micrograms per kilogram translate. It's just another way of saying ppb. The other thing is the FDA limits. I did some research. I saw that 4 states in the country have laws around this. California, Virginia, Illinois, and Maryland. Some follow whatever the FDA says for limits. And so I did some research this morning on the FDA website. Lead is only defined at this point. So it's 10 ppb for certain commodities or 20 ppb for others. So like root vegetables or other things like that. So they really split it out finely. So just know the bill is much lower, which may be fine. So in order for instruments, you'd want to consider what instruments can do. So I'd have to do more research to see how low it could go, really. So.
Okay. So there's a machinery and the equipment has some sort of tolerance level.
It
That's
does.
not the right word, but you can't
Right.
detect it below a certain level.
Correct. So when the instrument gets to its lowest detection limit, there's some variability there. And so you want to have your reporting limit a little bit above that, so you have a consistent reporting limit. So there's that. Otherwise, it's hard to trust the data. People would question that and not understand that there will be some variability depending on the day, the person running it, the temperature in the room, that sort of thing. So just know that. And the FDA hasn't defined the other 3 contaminants yet. So that's percolating through on the federal level as well. So I don't know if
Okay.
if that helps.
Good to know.
Yep.
Representative Burt?
Yeah, I believe the bill is mostly asking for companies to post the levels that they are finding on a representative samples at a certain. That's
Is it on?
monthly, or I'd have to look back, but
Yes.
you mentioned, the variability could potentially be room temperature and whatnot can affect that. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. So it's around the reporting limits. So the lower you force that instrument to detect, the more variable it could be because of environmental factors in the lab. Yeah. So six parts per billion may be reasonable. I don't know. I'd have to do some investigating on what the method is for testing these kind of commodities are. And that's another thing. FDA has specific methods that they want people to use in order to trust the data. So it's consistent data too. If everybody's using a different method, there's questions around, is it like for like, that sort of thing. Does that make sense? Yes.
John?
Cheryl, we learned yesterday that most of these 4 mentioned toxic heavy metals are residuals coming from soil, just occurring naturally.
Yes.
And so do you ever go out and test, since we've talked a lot about Primag soils this session, and test, residually in Vermont in soils where we're at with those?
Yep. We specifically don't collect the samples. We rely on folks to submit those to us. But yes, we have the capability to test soils, water, sludge, things like that. So that'd be our role. And we can do that.
Are you able to test for these heavy metals in
Yes.
soil?
Yeah. Yes. And water, correct.
Representative Burt?
So I think one concern we have, and maybe you can answer this, maybe not, but are manufacturers in Vermont who manufacture baby food, how difficult would it be for them to get this testing done? I'm assuming they would have to, if the labs aren't available in Vermont, they would be looking to another lab somewhere regionally, or they would have to send a sample to them, I'm guessing. Is that a common thing that food manufacturers have to do anyway? Is it an unreasonable burden of any sort?
I can't speak to the unreasonable burden part, but yes. So if a manufacturer, they have certain requirements, quality requirements they have to meet. And yes, they would send out to a commercial laboratory in the region, for example. I can think of a regional cheesemaker that I don't think is no longer stationed in Vermont per se, but they would send out to their regional lab. So they would obtain, if they have their own laboratory, they would send it there, or they would send it to a commercial place potentially. So the one thing I do want to clarify though is the way the Vermont Department of Health Laboratory and the Ag and Environmental Lab are set up, it would be under a program. So once we give results, we'd have to give it to our regulatory folks for awareness. We could also provide it to whoever wants to submit a sample, but we're not necessarily public facing labs in that way. So there's a process that needs to happen in order for, if there's a action limit that isn't met, for that process to start.
The testimony we heard yesterday, I think, said that there were maybe 39. At some, maybe in a state, there were 39 baby food brands or companies that were, active at selling in, I don't know if it's California. And that not all of them were in compliance, it seemed. But the major manufacturers of baby food, the names that we all are familiar with, they're already doing this. And probably if we went across the street, around the corner to the supermarket and grabbed a bottle or a pouch, we'd see the QR code. Anybody get a chance to do that?
I have not.
I did not, but,
Not like,
but presumably they are, there's a single package that they use for their product and they're using it in all states, including Vermont. But we also know that there are companies based in Vermont or maybe nearby that perhaps aren't selling into the other states at the moment, so they haven't had to comply. So I think it's those manufacturers who we're thinking about, who haven't already been affected by what's happened in other states, and trying to envision what are we asking of those companies as part of this, and how much of a burden would that be? So we understand that our own state lab wouldn't be the place they would go to, but they might be able to find another lab in the region who would be willing to do the work and be qualified based on the criteria here.
Yes, yes,
That all makes sense?
yes, it does.
Okay, good.
Yep.
Representative Lipsky.
Chair, this may be a question for you or our witness.
Yeah.
I wasn't here for a lot of yesterday afternoon.
Okay, yeah.
So what is the closest lab that meets that ISO, and then there was a backslash another?
Maybe the witness does have an answer to that.
I don't know what the closest lab would be.
Maryland, Virginia, and Vermont, or at least Eastern Seaboard.
Right.
If we were to
There were six, indicated there were 6 labs in Vermont that met, I think, these criteria.
Yeah,
Including ours, so.
right. Oh, was that A2LA that mentioned that?
Yeah,
The gentleman there?
but you've noted that we're not able to handle chemical tests.
Correct, correct. Chemistry would need to be brought up. Yes, we both have similar instruments, but there's clean, you want to keep one instrument clean, so to speak. So there's detectors in there. If you run food through it, it tends to be like a dirty type of thing, soils and water, not so much, but soils and sludge, also a dirty thing. So your cones or the detectors that they use would become more dirty. So you want to keep the dirty stuff away from the clean stuff that you're trying to detect, if that makes sense. So like water would be a cleaner commodity, different instrument, that sort of thing. But as far as the closest laboratories, I don't know who the commercial labs would be for that. But public health labs, specifically, their roles are to kind of help regulate, provide the data to make sure that manufacturers or whomever are meeting those requirements. So yeah, it's kind of a sticky wicket because we're regulatory, and we're not there for profit necessarily. So does that seem?
yes, but we still don't know.
The closest places are,
And
right?
the-
Right. So, right, they could potentially FedEx it or send it by UPS or something quicker versus the post office or, yeah.
Representative Bartholomew?
I may have misheard something, but you said that you can't really test currently for metals in the lab.
No, we can test for metals in the lab, just not in baby food commodities. So there's different testing methods for each type of thing you want to test. So for example, soils and,
So you can test for it in soil. All right, that's the part.
yeah,
Is connect.
sure. Yep.
Representative O'Brien?
Can you test for it in maple syrup, or do you?
We have checked lead in maple syrup, yes, when asked. When we used to do that regularly, but the program, it's not necessarily a big ask anymore.
Because of buckets not being used much.
Correct, yeah, they've changed the rules on galvanized stuff, so it's improved a lot. So there's not necessarily that pressure to ask for it.
Yeah. Does UVM have a certified lab, you know, UVM or UVM extension?
Not that I know of, not for ISO, no.
Yeah, I was wondering can you be a confirming lab, you know, if I was a manufacturer and an ISO lab said it had this, you know, many parts per billion, could I then appeal to you and say, can you double check this?
Not in baby food, but usually the public health labs, it's called a presumptive. I'm going to talk microbiology for a second because that's what I know. So it'd be a presumptive positive, and same with the chemistry method. So you'd always want to do two different methods to make sure you're getting similar results. So potentially you could do that within the lab or have a second lab be a referee lab. And usually in FDA cases, it's the FDA regional labs that do this. So there's a lab in Chelmsford that would take it on. And potentially if there was an issue with the test result not meeting the requirements, then they discuss about how to do an enforcement action. So, yeah, hello.
Hey, sorry, I was across the hall.
We talked about adding back into the bill formula, infant formula. Would the lab be able to test infant formula for these metals?
I'd have to look into what would be required. So I can tell you we are not ISO 17025 accredited,
Okay.
Which is the requirement of this bill. So that's rule number
Okay.
one.
That's fine then.
Yeah.
And it's not critical. Yeah, go ahead, John.
I don't see anything in the bill that says, it just says the manufacturers have to test, but it doesn't say anywhere where to test, does it? I mean,
A proficient lab,
so it could be
Yeah.
really anywhere in the
Anywhere.
country.
Correct.
any accredited, yeah.
Yep.
Right, yeah, assuming they meet the, yeah, okay.
Yes. So it'd be up to the manufacturer, it sounds like, to vet their labs that they're choosing and make sure they meet the requirements needed.
That our lab may not be equipped to do this now does not change anything
Doesn't,
necessarily.
it doesn't really change a whole lot, yeah.
I'm here as an advocate to say cautionary tale, I think, if it were gonna be pushed down to either of the labs.
Understanding,
Yeah.
I'm not missing something in the bill.
Good, other questions?
Just a comment, I mean, we haven't had a discussion committee wise here, but what is the universe of baby food? You know, if Greg makes applesauce, is he gonna QR code on his applesauce because it could be used as baby food, is a baby food, but isn't necessarily very fine. Selling it as a baby
Is
food.
applesauce in a baby food jar any different than applesauce in
Right,
a regular
exactly,
jar?
yeah.
Yeah,
I guess it depends on how it's marketed.
it's,
It's not sold in small little individual containers. I mean, you
Since-
can actually get small applesauces, but
I mean, it's defined here in the bill,
yeah.
baby food product. Sold specifically for babies and children younger than 2 years of age.
That's a loophole.
So just because something could be a baby food doesn't mean it's baby.
That we're limiting the
Sorry.
testing and really to the manufacturers who say it's baby food.
yeah.
The labeling, yeah.
But our marketing their products as baby food also.
Right, yeah.
So anything else that you wanted to add?
I can't think of anything, sir. No.
I have one more.
Yeah, please.
One testimony that we heard had to do with sourcing carrots. Talk about root vegetables were a great source of some of these heavy metals. And one of the sources came from a country in South America that had a long cultural history of lead mining.
Interesting.
And so those, let's call them carrots that came from that had a.
Higher source of lead.
And in the old, consistently a higher testing on that particular hazard. So would, so this is a question maybe out of your realm, but would that, be a serious warning flag of where you source
Yes, yes.
vegetables for the manufacturer, where they source?
Right. They would have to pay attention to their raw materials that they put into the mix, so to speak. One example of this is, I don't know if you've heard of the lead in applesauce recall that happened in the last few years. And under further investigation, it was cinnamon sourced from poor manufacturers, basically with other, cheap materials, so to speak, that is causing this. So it's affecting dollar stores or, lower income folks. That was detected by public health labs. Right. That was the first alarm that was raised, and then it became more of a larger national issue, so to speak. So that's all I can say is, like, we as public health labs are good for the initial warning, but we cannot do it alone without help as far as the manufacturers doing also due diligence and ensuring that they're not sourcing their products from potentially contaminated sites.
Brian.
Sure, while we have you here, even though it's not in the bill, can you or are you testing water, soil and food for PFOAs and microplastics?
We're not doing microplastic testing. We have our method EPA method 533 in drinking water certified. We've had that for about a little over a year. And we've had moderate requests for testing. So I think we're getting the word out still, and programs have had challenges with funding because it takes time and effort to have the boots on the ground to go collect and to bring it to our lab, sort of thing.
Soil? Can you test soil for it?
Not yet, but we're working on that method. So we're hoping to have that on board soon. Yeah.
And would you test on behalf of other state agencies or departments?
Correct. So we work with DEC primarily, Agency of Agriculture also we're working with. So we're
And specific to the PFAS and water.
giveaways, correct.
I wasn't sure when you answered the question, whether you were talking about the public or consumers submitting samples for testing that hasn't ramped up yet, or if it's the state that hasn't ramped up.
Right. We don't have that goes back to reporting. So we don't want to be in the position to deliver a test result to a member of the public without a program in the wings to help translate the test result.
Yeah.
Exactly, because it looks hard to read to a normal consumer, and I totally get that. But we're not in the business of interpretation. We just provide the data for somebody. So it would have to be
Water utility sends us in our bill once a year, a report, and it's indecipherable too.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Jen?
So would you consider municipal water companies as part of the public, or are they an agency or?
No, so I've been working with the public drinking water folks at DEC in the background, so they are aware of our capabilities. I understand they had a pitfall last year on the federal level to remove any federal level language from the state statutes. So from what I understand, they've done that. So we're going to continue that conversation. So public drinking water folks sometimes have a lab already. There's a lab in Massachusetts, a commercial lab. That would be a lot closer for Rutland, Bennington County, maybe even Wyndham County to go send their stuff. But the northern half of the state could be well served by us if they chose to use us. So I think Depends on DEC's
I
rules and how they.
remember it was 3 or 4 years ago. When I met you. This had really emerged by our,
Yes,
municipal public works director.
right. I remember the conversation.
Well, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
We could maybe have you back to talk more about PFAS and water and soil, yeah. Save that for another
That
day.
isn't going away anytime soon.
In fact,
I'm glad it wasn't a waste of time to bring it on then. Thanks.
Have a continued good travel.
Thank you, kind sir. Thank you. Have a good day.
Okay, so, let's. As this bill goes, I don't know whether we have anybody else who scheduled to testify on 536, Patricia?
This afternoon, we did.
Yeah, this afternoon, and then, yeah, so I'm thinking that we may be able to move ahead next week with some markup. And well, potentially vote by the end of the week, yeah, next week before we head home for the break. So be thinking about it, and I know we've had several issues raised, the things we may be able to fix. Just be thinking about those and anything else you think might want to be looked at and checked.
I just wondered procedurally, like why this bill, is getting a lot of attention. I mean, I think we all agree with it, but it's just interesting how it just really came up and now we spent a bunch of time on testimony and.
It seemed like something that we could do and agree on and that we could get done before the break. And we had the witnesses, so yeah, it hasn't always been easy to get people to respond to requests. So on that note, appreciate Migrant Justice for being available today to talk about another bill. And Will, if you want to join us at the table.
Yeah, actually, my colleague Abel is gonna get us started.
Okay, all right. We can offer you 2 chairs if you want to both be here too, however you want to do it. And do either of you want to share your screens?
I think not. We did provide one PDF to the committee late, but did that get uploaded in time?
We posted, okay.
Yeah, so there's, thank you so much. Yeah, committee members are welcome to pull up a 2-pager that will provide some additional background to our testimony, but.
So this is going to be on H403 and it's the farm worker bill. It has 3 sections, essentially minimum wage for agriculture workers, removing the exemption that's in existing law. Similarly for overtime, and then there was a 3rd section on a housing survey, essentially. So why don't we go ahead? We can turn it over to you, and thank you both for coming in.
Thank you. Well, try to be brief and then leave some time for Will to also get into some of the details and some recommendations. My name is Abel Luna, and I'm an organizer with Migrant Justice. I've been organizing with Migrant Justice for the past 13 years or so. It's been a long time. And throughout that time, part of my experience has been developing relationship and close ties with the community that we're trying to protect through this bill. Migrant farm workers, milking cows on dairy farms in Vermont. And through the time that I've been here, I've also seen a different array of issues or different issues that are happening in the dairy industry. And I think throughout the years, as Migrant Justice coming to the State House, we provided ample testimony and examples of those issues. I'll mention some, and we can talk a little bit more about that. Workers, for example, are working, long hours, 60 to 80 hours per week. And they're doing it without an overtime pay. They're doing it without a Vermont minimum wage. So workers are excluded from these laws. One of the things that we've seen is that workers are living in deplorable housing conditions. Living with pests such as bed bugs, mice, rats, and, many other issues, people sharing a room, in between three workers. Sometimes there's cracked windows, cracked walls, sometimes there's no proper heating systems, sometimes there's no running water. Recently we were at a farm where, there's no like hot water for people to like shower or to like wash their hands. And we're talking about like the winter, it's been a really cold winter. People facing discrimination, sexual harassment, and many other issues that are happening on dairy farms. And a lot of these issues sometimes don't, make it to the state house or don't make it to like, people's ears because people are afraid of speaking up. People are afraid of retaliation and, shedding light on some of these conditions. And I think it's important for us to recognize that these issues are not new. These issues have existed for a very long time, decades and decades ago. And the lack of protections and exclusions, for the people that, put food on our table, that are milking the cows, that are making sure that the dairy industry doesn't collapse. As I mentioned, go back a long time ago, and these exclusions are based on discrimination and, frankly, racism. So I think it's important for us to look at it from that point of view as well. It's a workforce issue, but also it's an issue based on discrimination or racism. That goes back to really dark time of history of this country. Throughout the years, as I've been working with migrant justice, we pushed for legislation, we pushed for changes. And I think Vermont has done a good job, passing different legislations to protect the communities. And we've seen, when legislation is crafted the right way, when legislation is, inclusive of the voices of the people that are most affected, when it's designed to protect, the most affected communities, legislation can have a really positive impact in the life of the people that we're trying to protect. We've seen that with the driver license campaign. We've seen that with the burning partial policing policy. We've seen that, with other legislation that have passed. And so, as we try to work on this bill, we need to ensure, that that's our goal and that is our aim, to protect our communities, to ensure that we don't have, two different classes of workers that are earning overtime pay after 40 hours, and then another group of workers that are earning, overtime pay after 60 hours. There's examples of other states have, passed legislation and, facing different phases, or you start with 60, then you get down to 40. So I think, as we think about creating legislation, that should be part of our goal, to look for solutions that are going to benefit workers. We don't want workers, working 60, 80 hours a week without, receiving what they deserve. Last thing I think I'll mention is that, as my job as organizer throughout the years with migrant justice, one of the things that I do and a lot of my colleagues do is to visit farms, talk to workers, and try to organize and empower our community to, speak up and raise our collective voice to try to demand some of those changes. And, we've organized on some farms, and, we've been successful, but we can do it on every single farm. And therefore, we need clear legislation, that ensures that workers are going to be, receiving the minimum wage, that workers are going to be receiving, overtime pay, that workers' voice is going to be taken into account when people are consulting about, okay, what is your housing conditions? What do they look like? Not just sending a survey to the farmer, for the farmer to fill out. We really need to ensure that workers' voices are included, on whatever we're trying to do. As I mentioned, if we don't take that into account, then we're going to create something just to feel good or look good in paper. But at the end of the day, if there's no like clear enforcement mechanisms, nothing is going to work. It's just going to be there sort of for show. And so I think really encourage you guys to think about it from that perspective. Don't approach it from like a scarcity point of mind or point of view where, okay, well, what's going to happen to the farms? What's going to happen to farmers? Are farms going to shut down? farms have been open for, a really long time, and that, that exclusion from the law has affected our community from a really long time as well. So I think it's time to do the right thing. It's time to end those exclusions to ensure that the people that are putting food on our table are being treated with dignity, with respect, and to ensure that Vermont is, one of the states that is leading, in these issues. I won't take much time, and I'll pass it to my colleague Bill.
Thank you, Abel. Do we pause and see if we've gotten questions? Representative Boswell.
Yeah, I'd like to hear a little bit more in terms of the, some of the housing conditions that you described sound really deplorable. And I'm wondering, like, just if you were going to make a generalization, how much of the worker housing would you describe as substandard and how much of it is okay? I'm hoping some of it is okay.
Yeah, and I think we'll get a little bit into that.
Okay,
My question,
okay.
my answer to
Okay, that's fine. I can wait.
Representative O'Brien.
Just along those same lines, it's generally the fire marshal, right, who inspects rental housing, right? And so is it much different with agricultural housing? Agricultural worker housing?
Yeah, so from the switch, maybe 3 years ago or 4 years ago, it used to be municipal health inspectors, then it was sort of brought under the purview of the Division of Fire Safety. Since that switch, we aren't aware of the fire marshal ever having inspected farm worker housing. Yeah, and we know this bill would seek to create sort of a pathway of complaints to get to the fire marshal. But we have yet to see that be an effective method of enforcement.
So there's no, I mean, even municipalities, there's really no inspection at all of farm worker housing now in the state of Vermont.
As a practical matter,
Right, yeah, okay.
Other questions? And this may be something that you get into too, Will, but just to give us a little bit of an understanding of how much, how big your reach is, and you indicated that you're not able to get onto all farms in the organizing work that you do. To help us get a sense of how many agricultural workers might be already getting minimum wage. I think that's one of the things that we're curious about. Do you have any insight into that?
I think we have some survey results that we can share. But outside of the Mill with Dignity program, I think there's a lot of workers, a good percentage of the workers that we visit that are not receiving the minimum wage. Pretty much the majority of, I would say, that are getting the minimum wage. Also, the Mill with Dignity program ensures that farms are up to compliance, but outside of that, farms can decide on what they choose to pay. And in our experience, it's very little, the amount of workers that are actually getting
13%.
13%, okay. Well, if there aren't any other questions, why don't we go ahead and let you speak then? Yeah.
So what would you say is the usual wage?
So we see a median wage for immigrant dairy workers of $11.67 an hour from a 2024 survey.
Mm-hmm.
I'll speak a little more to that, but at that time it was $2 an hour below the minimum wage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, since housing is often factored into that wage too, is there sort of a consensus in the dairy farming community of how much, that costs the dairy farm, and so how much would come out of that presumed minimum wage? Or is it all over the map?
So generally in our experience, the workers are not seeing room and board deductions from their paychecks. There might be a sort of conceptual understanding that, yeah, I'm going to pay them this amount because they're getting free housing. But there's never a labor contract where that is negotiated or where that's being made apparent. Yeah.
I just asked Greg a question on H2A, that's very specified, right, as far as,
What we pay per hour.
and housing too, right?
Yeah,
Must be
yeah,
provided.
because it's a federal program. Yeah, very.
Does your work involve, working with seasonal farm workers as well as dairy farmers?
There's no seasonal work on dairy farms. We do sometimes have contact with like very, maybe Apple workers, but it's like very minimal.
Representative Lipsky.
Yeah, and I'm going back to housing. We've had, and I think it was the Housing and Conservation Board that had a group that was working on farm worker housing, providing funding, certain grants up to a certain amount for upgrades. And most of them had to do with security, with hygiene, with privacy. I mean, they had a fairly high standard. And I think they checked to make sure when these grants were completed that those standards were met. Are you aware of any farms where those projects have taken place? And I would assume there were some inspections in those cases.
Yeah.
And maybe it's a small percentage of the overall farm worker housing staff.
Yeah. It is a relatively small percentage. There are sort of two programs that have come out of those investments into VHCB. One is the Farm Worker Housing Repair Program, and another is investment in housing replacement. Both are self-selective, right? They require the farm employer to apply for the funds, and it's a relatively small percentage. So the investments have been very good, but haven't resulted in the sort of systemic change for the industry. The replacement programs, the new houses that are being built through that, and that is sort of the state funding is always a piece of that puzzle, but never all of it. And we've been involved in bringing together other funding sources to make those projects happen. Those have resulted in very high quality new houses going up. The replacement programs, those are for specific elements. So it's a roof repair or it's new windows. And generally there is an inspection portion of that. It doesn't necessarily mean that beyond the elements that are being replaced, that the rest of the housing is high quality. They're looking to make sure that there aren't any sort of glaring red flags anywhere else. But
Representative Bartholomew.
I was just looking through the survey results that you provided. I'm actually having trouble finding anything here that isn't alarming. The one thing that really jumped out at me, and I'm just wondering if you think this is accurate, where I suffered an accident or injury, 77%, is that a real number, you think? 77% injured on the job.
Yeah, that is a reality. People are working with under-the-counter animals, machinery, you're working with chemicals, lack of protective equipment, personal protective equipment. So I think injuries and accidents are like a very common thing that happens on dairy farms.
yeah, and I'll share with the committee assistant another survey from 2020, which focused on health and safety issues that goes into more detail, sort of breaking down what that 77% would look like and giving more percentages on what Abel is talking about. What's the result of injuries from animals, from heavy machinery, from chemical exposure. So hopefully that can get loaded onto the committee page and you can take a look at the more disaggregated health and safety data.
I'm going to let you, Will, say what you had to say. So if you,
fantastic. Thank you, members of the committee. Again, Will Lambeck, testifying with Migrant Justice, Vermont-based human rights organization founded and led by immigrant farm workers. You heard Abel talk about our 15-year plus history advocating for expanded rights and improving conditions for immigrant farm worker community. And as many of the committee members know, in 2018, Migrant Justice created the Milk with Dignity program, which is a worker-driven human rights initiative supporting farms and farm workers through private supply chain agreements with dairy corporations. And I'll come back to talk about that a little bit more. So yeah, we want to focus our testimony on conditions experienced by immigrant workers on the state's dairy farms. And we know that this isn't representative of the entire agricultural workforce in the state, but in large part, immigrant dairy workers are sustaining the state's agricultural economy. As you know, Vermont's dairy industry accounts for the majority of agricultural income in the state, and farms employing immigrant workers account for the vast majority of dairy production in the state. We estimate that immigrant workers account for about 80% of hired non-family employees in the dairy industry. That's about 1,000 workers on farms around Vermont. 80%, yeah. And that percentage is higher in the lowest paid roles of milker, pusher, feeder, calf care, things like that. And then when you look at other roles, mechanic, herdsman or herds manager, those are less likely to employ immigrant workers. But basically, yeah, if you go into any dairy barn or milk parlor in the state, if that farm is large enough to have non-family workers, and if they're hiring labor, chances are they are hiring immigrant workers. So what we see in this workforce is what we would call a tale of two dairy industries. On farms in the Milk with Dignity program, we're seeing great strides being made, but outside the program, workers are laboring long hours for low pay and unsafe and discriminatory working conditions and living in inadequate and sometimes downright inhumane housing. So you have access to this survey. This was conducted in 2024, with the support of the University of Massachusetts of Amherst Labor Center. We developed a comprehensive questionnaire covering wages, hours, health and safety, housing, and treatment on the farms over the spring and summer of 2024. Current and former dairy workers, this was a participatory action research model, fanned out across Vermont, conducting hour-long surveys with 212 workers in their homes, on the farm, at community assemblies. And so I'll just go through briefly some of the results. You also have access to them there. Again, with wages, 87% making below the minimum wage, a median wage of $11.67, which was at the time $2 an hour below the state's minimum wage. Approximately 1 in 5 have had wages illegally withheld, and 1 in 3 do not receive pay stubs. On hours, half of respondents work 12 hours a day or more, with a quarter of them working 7 days a week, so no day off. 3/4 don't receive paid holidays, 61% don't receive paid vacations, and over half don't receive paid sick leave, despite Vermont's law requiring that to happen. 1 in 4 workers don't have 8 hours of consecutive rest during the day. So you're working split shifts throughout the day that don't provide you with the ability to have a full night's sleep. And 1 in 5 report that they can't take time off if sick or injured. And we saw this particularly during the COVID pandemic, on farms around the state, workers feeling forced to work while sick with COVID. Discriminatory conditions are widespread. 53% of workers report experiencing discrimination in the workplace, with most reporting discrimination based on language or country of origin. Housing, this goes back to your question, Representative, 82% of workers reported issues with employer-provided housing. And Abel mentioned some of these: safety concerns, pest infestations, mold, broken appliances and fixtures, insufficient heating and insulation, workers sharing beds or sleeping in common spaces due to overcrowding. And then to the health and safety, you mentioned, over 3/4 of respondents have suffered a work-related illness or injury. And the common dangers are being struck or crushed by cows, falling on slippery floors, exposure to chemicals, resulting in broken bones, sprains, rashes, bleeds, and more. 2/3 of workers reported not receiving training from an employer supervisor when they started their job, and over half said that they don't have access to a first aid kit, while the majorities also lack access to personal protective equipment, such as masks, goggles, and eye wash stations. So while shocking, these conditions are not new. They show continuity with a similar survey conducted in 2014 across most metrics. And then there was also an additional 2020 survey, which I've now shared with you and is also available on our website, that focused on health and safety conditions. And these are the most comprehensive and methodologically sound data on labor conditions in the dairy industry in Vermont, and they demonstrate the critical role of farm worker-led interventions like the Milk with Dignity program, because you see that without the essential elements of this program, the dairy industry remains unwilling to provide the dignified working and living conditions that farm workers deserve. I know we're short on time. I wanted to speak more about the Milk with Dignity program in detail. I'll maybe come back to that. But in essence, this is a program created by workers that creates a collaborative solution to all these problems that you're hearing about. Supply chain agreements with the companies buying from the farms that require their suppliers to apply worker-authored code of conduct standards created by workers, and empowers a third-party auditor, the Milk with Dignity Standards Council, to objectively monitor farms' compliance with the standards in that code. It's just really transformed conditions on 20% of farms, or 20% of the dairy industry in the state.
Maybe since we are a little short on time, we could plan to have you come back at some point later in the session to give us an update on that program.
That'd be fantastic.
Which I understand is largely driven by a buyer, essentially, whether it's Ben and Jerry's, I'll just say their name, or someone else who is willing to participate. Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. But then,
Just, we have 400 some dairy farms in the state. How many have signed up for the Dairy with Dignity?
there are right now 53 farms that are enrolled in the program, the Milk with Dignity program. By volume production or mass, I guess if we're talking hundredweight, it's about 20% of Vermont's dairy industry by volume.
Representative Byrd.
Are those conventional dairies?
They are conventional, with the exception that there is now one organic farm that is enrolled through a new supply chain agreement from an emerging brand called Vermont Way Foods, which is launching a cheese line called Cheese with Dignity that is sourcing from an organic farm in Addison County.
Yeah, I guess with an organic farm, I'm assuming there is some sort of standards for farm employees as well, or is there not?
Yeah, there are not. Yeah, so organic standards do not include standards for labor conditions. And while organic farms are less likely to employ non-family workers because their sizes are generally smaller, those that do employ non-family workers often have very comparable labor conditions to conventional farms in the state. Yeah, it would be it would be a myth, I think, to think, oh, organic farms must be better employers than conventional dairies.
Not sure if any questions to ask, just looking at the clock, because it could take a while to answer. I guess just quickly, was the survey that you did in 2024 consistent with other information we might have from other dairy states or other states that did similar research?
Yeah, it is the most comparable. This is now a couple years old, but there was a report out of New York State called Milked, that somewhat similar methodology, widespread interviews with farm workers in New York State, showed similar conditions across the lake.
I'll just add, and then I'll let Jed have the final question, but that just going back to your point, there's an economic question here, but there's also a symbolic issue, and whether people are currently getting the minimum wage or not, having the exclusion or the exemption written into law is something that we should be thinking about, I think. So, Jed.
Thank you, Chairman. This is such a, this isn't the first time I believe I've seen these results, but we have a member who's not in the room, who's participating in a program in a different building, a large CAFO rule committee. But I think this committee and you would benefit from having a full committee members, present. This missing member is actually a large dairy farmer, thoughtful, and I think his input and interaction with you would not be hostile, but I think would make for a more comprehensive understanding. So if there was ever an opportunity later in
I think that.
another
I
day.
think these gentlemen know Representative Nelson, and I would certainly encourage them to speak offline.
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll have a chance to discuss this topic certainly more.
I was just saying that, when we say we do visits to a lot of farms in the state of Vermont, that includes, a lot of farms, sometimes, Nelson farms, and conditions are basically the same outside of the Milk with Dignity program, whether you're a small farm or a large farm. You have, 5 workers or 30 workers, conditions are very similar. I think, we, going back to why are we here and sort of like you guys having an opportunity to actually, write something in legislation that's gonna, change, the life of workers. I think it's gonna be very meaningful. I really encourage you guys to look at this issue with a humane point of view, or to think about the workers that are sustaining the industry, participating or making sure that Vermont's economy stays afloat as well. If you guys need any more conversations or confused on something, I think it's important to talk to organizations that are working directly with the community that is most impacted. I think usually if we go and ask a farmer, we're going to hear a different story, right? And that could be the case. We're here to provide any sort of insight, perspective, or education on what you guys are needing.
Appreciate your both coming in this morning, and I think we'll stop now just because we're into lunch, but we can debrief a little bit on this after, when we come back. I know that there's concern about bad weather this afternoon. It doesn't look like the blizzard has begun.